So let's get right into it. We're going to explore one of the biggest questions there is about, well, us. Why do we help each other? Is it some kind of cold calculation, a random accident, or is it something that's just hardwired deep into our DNA?
It's a tough question, for sure. And for a long time, some of the most famous experiments in psychology seem to have a really clear and really dark answer. They seem to be screaming, yes. See, in the aftermath of World War II, a lot of researchers were obsessed with trying to understand our capacity for evil. And honestly, what they found was pretty disturbing.
And that brings us to probably one of the most famous, or maybe infamous, experiments in history. It's one that really, for decades, colored our whole view of human nature. It painted us as fundamentally obedient creatures, even if that meant being cruel.
Just let that number sink in for a second. 67%. Back in 1963, Stanley Milgram discovered that 2/3 of regular people, just like you and me, would give what they thought were life-threatening electric shocks to a total stranger. And why? Simply because a guy in a lab coat told them to. This finding really hammered home a bleak view of humanity, that deep down, we're just wired to follow even the most antisocial orders.
For the longest time, that was pretty much the accepted story. But over the last few decades, something really amazing has happened. There's been this huge shift in the research. It turns out, if you really want to figure out how kind people are, you can't just measure how cruel they can be under pressure. You have to look for something totally different. You have to look for spontaneous generosity.
And here's the funny part. The first really big clues about this didn't come from psychologists who were studying morality. Nope, they came from economists who were just trying to understand rational negotiation. They ended up accidentally creating these simple little games that revealed this profoundly prosocial cooperative streak in all of us.
Okay, so let's start with what's called the ultimatum game. It's super simple. Imagine I have $10. I have to offer you some split of that money. You can either accept my offer or you can reject it. But here's the catch. If you reject my offer, neither of us gets a single penny. So right away, you've got this tension between what's purely logical and what feels fair.
And this is where it gets really interesting. Look at the massive difference between what was predicted and what actually happens. Economists thought, okay, rationally, the proposer should offer the smallest amount possible, like 1 cent. And the responders should accept it because, hey, a cent is better than nothing, right? But that is not what people do. Not even close. People consistently offer somewhere between 30 to 50%. And the most common offer of all? A fair 50-50 split. And the responders? They will actually pay money by walking away with nothing just to punish an offer they think is selfish. We have this deep, innate drive for fairness.
Okay, but you could argue that maybe people are only being generous because they're afraid of being punished, of having their offer rejected. So to test that, researchers came up with the dictator game. Now it's the same setup. I've got $10 and I decide how to split it. But this time, you have no power at all. You can't reject my offer. You just have to take what I give you. This experiment isolates pure, unforced altruism. So, what do you think you'd do?
The results here are just fascinating because they're so split. You have a really big group of people who give absolutely nothing. But then you have another equally large group that spontaneously decides to give away half of their money, even with zero consequences for being selfish. This tells us that a huge chunk of humanity is just instinctively generous, even when nobody's making them be.
But being prosocial is about more than just splitting some cash in a lab. So what happens when the stakes are higher? In a setup they call the pain versus gain paradigm, people were given some money, but they could choose to use it to stop a total stranger from getting a painful electric shock. And what happened? On average, people gave up about half of their potential earnings just to protect someone they would never even meet.
So this all raises a pretty big question, right? Where does this instinct actually come from? Is it something we have to be taught, or is it a much deeper part of our biological blueprint? Well, all the evidence seems to point to some really ancient roots that go back long before we were even human. Remember that Milgram experiment with people giving shocks? Now, get this. In a study from 1964, rhesus monkeys figured out that if they pulled a chain to get food, it would also give an electric shock to another monkey. What did they do? Most of them just stopped pulling the chain. And one monkey chose to starve for almost 2 weeks just to make sure it wouldn't cause another monkey any harm.
And you see this kind of thing everywhere once you start looking. Chimps will help out humans they've never met before. Capuchin monkeys famously throw a fit if they get a boring cucumber when their buddy gets a delicious grape. They're protesting inequality. Even rats. Rats will stop and free a trapped friend before they go for a chocolate treat. The roots of kindness are so deep. It's a fundamental part of the social toolkit for so many species.
And this instinct shows up in us right from the very beginning. I mean, before babies can even talk, they show a preference for puppet characters who help others over ones who get in the way. By about 14 months, toddlers are already on their own, helping adults who look like they're struggling with a task. It really seems like we are born with a kind of prosocial calculator already running.
So, okay, if kindness is built into our blueprint, then what is it that flips that switch? What's going on inside our minds in that moment when we decide to help or, when we decide to just walk on by?
Well, researchers have kind of boiled it down to a few key things. First, we think about our reputation. We just behave better when we think someone might be watching. Second, we calculate the risk, the chance that someone might take advantage of our kindness. But the third one, emotion, is arguably the most powerful driver of all. It all comes down to how we feel about what another person is going through.
And this is such a critical distinction. It turns out there are two different ways we can feel empathy. The first kind is where you literally feel someone else's pain. It's like you're absorbing their distress. And honestly, that can be so overwhelming that it makes you want to just turn away to make your own discomfort stop. But the second kind is about understanding their pain without getting totally consumed by it. Think of it like this. The first is like crying with them. The second is about knowing why they're crying and what they might need. And the research suggests it's this second path, this cognitive compassion, that's the real fuel for genuine, costly altruism.
And we know this is true because when that system breaks down, so does altruism. There's a condition called alexithymia, where people have real trouble identifying or understanding emotions in themselves and others. And they show a significantly lower willingness to help other people, especially if it comes at a cost to themselves. That inner emotional compass is just absolutely essential.
So let's recap. We've got economic games that show our innate sense of fairness. We see these same roots in other animals and in our own babies. We're starting to understand the emotional mechanics behind it all. So what's the big theory that ties all of this together? Well, it's a pretty revolutionary idea that kind of flips the old idea of survival of the fittest on its head.
It's called survival of the friendliest. And the core idea is that Homo sapiens, our species, didn't outcompete other ancient humans by being stronger or even smarter as individuals. We won because we were better collaborators. Our superpower wasn't aggression. It was our ability to be friendly and cooperate. Our unique capacity to form these massive, complex, cooperative social networks, that was our ultimate evolutionary advantage. Our kindness is what made us the fittest.
So the science really does give us a much more hopeful picture of ourselves than those early shock experiments ever did. It suggests that our default setting isn't cruelty, it's cooperation. And so the final question, really, is a practical one. In our modern world, which so often seems to be all about competition and individual success, how can we get better at tapping into this ancient, powerful, and deeply human instinct for kindness?